Hi, this is Dr. Giobbi. Welcome to the Muse and Psyche podcast. Today we're going to continue our discussion of performance anxiety for the performing artist. In our first discussion of performance anxiety for the performing artist, we introduced an exercise in mindfulness meditation by the Tibetan American Buddhist psychologist Chogyam Trungpa. And I had asked you to begin at that point a daily meditative practice of 10 minutes in the morning or in the evening, or if possible, doing it twice daily, morning and evening before bed, and just repeating the mantra, repeating the idea, not mindlessly, but mindfully, full of intention of cessation of judging others and cessation of judging the self. This exercise is remarkable not only for dealing with issues of performance anxiety, but in all aspects of life. So please continue that exercise. And some individuals will see transformations take place in their habitual ways of approaching the world within hours. Others, it takes weeks. So remain patient and remain open to the possibility of change and continue to do the exercise. In our second discussion, I introduced a very simple phenomenological method of phenomenological reduction. And there are many different ways of doing phenomenological reductions. But this is an exercise that helps us to identify exactly what circumstances, what contextual circumstances, what cues, and even will help us to begin to uncover what unknown factors are triggering and influencing our experience of anxiety while performing, while playing. So continue to do this phenomenological exercise that I introduced last week. And just to recap what that's all about, I'd like you to take instances where you feel anxiety in front of an audience, playing, performing, and compare those with other instances where you experience anxiety. And try to parse out, try to identify what are the similarities, what are the differences. And you'll have to keep notes in doing this, keep a record, a journal of what you discover. And what we're trying to identify here is what are the circumstances in which the anxiety takes place. Is it a specific person? Is it a specific setting? What are the circumstances surrounding the settings? It could be anything from doing it for receiving payment for what you're doing. Could be the issue that points towards the anxiety. So parse out these similar situations. What circumstances are common across all anxious experiences, and what experiences are unique just to your musical performance experience of anxiety. The phenomenological reduction also asks you to take instances in which you are doing things in front of other people, such as maybe giving a talk or a lecture, in which you do not experience performance anxiety, and begin to look at the circumstances that surround both of those issues and see if you can identify factors that are unique just to the musical performance. And this is the phenomenological reduction. Remember, the phenomenology places emphasis on your experience rather than on cause and effect or facts or truths about physiological experiences. So whereas identifying, say, a fight, flight, freeze, physiological explanation of anxiety, we're interested more in the phenomenological experience of the anxiety. Common illustration of this is feeling either cold, comfortable, or hot in a room, as compared to looking at the temperature gauge, the measured temperature, 68, 75 degrees in the room. We're privileging the experience over the quantitative measurement. Now, why is this important? Because it helps us to understand anxiety, performance anxiety, not as something we have, but as something we experience. We're looking at the self, the style of life, the approach to living, the worldview, not as an object, but as a process. And in so doing, we eliminate any traps of what Erik Erikson called the marionette syndrome. Why am I anxious? Because I have anxiety. That's becoming a puppet to an idea, to a label. Instead, we're seeing this, I am experiencing the anxiety as part of the process of myself. The self as temporal-based, as time-based, as a process rather than the self as an object or a thing. This is an essential feature of humanistic psychology. It's an essential feature of Eastern Buddhist psychology. And it's found to be very useful as a starting point of dealing with this thing we call the experience of performance anxiety. So I'd like you to begin to think of yourself as a process rather than as a thing. Think of a flame, fire. What is a flame? Is it a gas? Is it a liquid? Is it a solid, an object? And a flame, once you begin to think of this and understand it, is a chemical reaction. It's a process. And instead of thinking of the flame as an object, we begin to see it as a process, and we can apply the same concept to the self. The self is a process, the self not as an object. When we begin to understand not only the phenomenon that we experience of anxiety or performance anxiety, but also experiencing the self in this way, we begin to think less in a cause and effect way. This is making me nervous. This is making me anxious. And instead, we understand it as a dynamic process. So in this light, we're going to begin to take a look at the dynamic process of the self that set up the conditions for the performance anxiety that we're experiencing. And we're going to do this through Adlerian psychology. The goal of Adlerian psychology is to identify the dynamic process of the self. In other words, to become aware of the style of life, the approaches to living, the strategies, our worldviews that we have learned over time to structure how we experience everything from performing to making friends to being in romantic relationships, etc. And Alfred Adler referred to this as the style of life, the style of being, the approach to being. So we're going to look at this approach as the collection of habits, the worldview that we take, that we approach the world, how we come to experience everything from our friendships to reading a book to making music in front of an audience. One of the ways to identify our worldview, to understand how it is that we're even approaching things, is to go through a series of exercises that Adler proposed that helps us to identify the chronological and historical establishment of our worldview. And Adler asks us to begin by thinking of our earliest experience and to identify what the earliest memory we have is. And from that, once we identify what that memory is, this requires sitting quietly and introspecting and coming up with our earliest memory. And then understanding that memory and looking into what is the memory, what are the factors of the memory, and then trying to make a connection with how that resonates in our current adult life. How does that memory serve to provide clues to how we approach the world as adults. Often we develop methods of preserving a sense of self, a sense of integrity, a sense of self-worth and purpose, and ego strength, a sense of being a worthwhile human being through certain strategies that we learn in childhood. And those strategies work very well in childhood, but they become habitual, and sometimes we get locked into a certain way of thinking. And in adulthood, those old strategies no longer serve us very well. Adler said that everything we do, we can understand as a reaction against feelings of inferiority. Adler felt that we come into this world as altricial beings. In other words, we need the help of mom and dad and parents, caregivers for our own survival. And we learn certain methods of survival. And these feelings of physiological inferiority transfer into survival characteristics of staying safe, and then later, as Abraham Maslow illustrated, transcending the physical needs and the safety needs to belonging needs and feelings of social worthwhileness, and then finally self-actualization. This is Abraham Maslow's pyramid of hierarchy of needs. And in Adler, we get Adler claims that that the sense of being inferior is a way to understand all behavior that we take part in our lives. And by thinking of our first earliest childhood memory, Adler helps us to begin to understand what he calls our lifestyle, our style of life, our style of being. This is much different than thinking of a personality as a thing that you measure. And instead, we're looking at worldview and structure of character, how we come to experience and anticipate the world based on one reaction: how to feel safe, how to feel secure, how to fight feelings of inferiority. So I'm going to adapt this Adlerian. If we were doing Adlerian psychotherapy, you'd start with the earliest childhood memory, but I'm going to ask you as a musician to adapt this exercise a little differently this week. Now that you understand a little bit about Adlerian theory, I'm going to ask you to remember your earliest experience with music. What is the earliest experience you have with music that created a significant emotional reaction in yourself? What is the earliest experience with music that you realized that you wanted to spend the rest of your life pursuing the creation of music, the making of music? And I'd like you to think about those moments. I would like you to spend some time this week thinking about your earliest emotional experience with music, and flesh that out, maybe write about it, maybe get it down and journal it. At the very least, spend time meditating on it, and think about what were the conditions, what was the original impulse towards music, and be aware of what you feel, not only what you think. Don't intellectualize on this alone. I want you to become introspectively aware of what you're feeling emotionally while you think of these memories, what you're thinking what you're judging and categorizing, and also what you're physiologically experiencing. Be aware, are you holding tensions in your body? Are you grinding your teeth or clenching your fist? Or is your body relaxed as you recall this memory? And think about that first earliest childhood experience when music really gripped you. And once you establish this, meditate on the feeling. And I'd like you, in the form of Adler's therapy, I'd like you to meditate, even to journal on how that earliest experience with music relates to your current adult experience of performing and making music. And see what kind of insights this develops for you. See what kind of ideas, including anxiety and nervousness and judgment and even in the context of overcoming feelings of inferiority through performing and music making. Enjoy this week's work, and thank you for listening.